Hello YouTube. So today we're going to do an assembly on an H1 gear hub. If you saw my previous video on how to get the gear hub out, that went pretty well. So this fixture that I made a while back, it was really great because it hinges up, so you can use this to take the gear hub out of the truck, and then it folds completely flat to allow you to give a place to build your gear hub onto, because it's best if you could just build it onto the spindle, holding the spindle in place. So I cleaned everything up here, and I got all new bearings here except for this one. The outer bearing looks pretty good. If you have an inner bearing that looks like this one where it's burnt and scored, it looks like it got really hot, just don't reuse the old bearings if they look that way. It's not worth it. So I took this thing and I chucked it up on the lathe, and I machined about 2 or 3 thousandths off of this. After 75,000 miles, this was scored up pretty bad, had some grooves in it, and it only took a couple thousand to clean it up. And the seal still has plenty of pressure against that, so it's not undersized or anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to bolt this spindle onto this fixture here and put a couple nuts on the back side and tighten those up, and that's going to hold the spindle in place to build the entire gear hub on. Now, I know not everybody's going to have this fixture, but you could actually use like an extra wheel if you have a wheel laying around. Bolt it into the wheel, then find a way to secure that wheel down to your bench, or even use the whole tire in the wheel. That would work too. If you have the gearbox off, you more than likely have a wheel and tire laying around, and it really helps if you can secure this thing to not keep it going anywhere. So I got all the parts. Move the camera here a little bit. I got all the parts we need. Put this thing together, and so this gear I'm going to reuse. I'm doing the 12K upgrade kit, so this is the new 12K gear, and the gearbox has been completely cleaned and painted. All the covers have been painted. I made these inspection covers out of some 1/2-inch plate aluminum, had it anodized. I wanted to put the sight glass in. I know you can go out there and spend $800, $900, $1,000 on the really cool covers with cooling fins on it, but I'm not sold on the cooling fins that it actually does anything at all. I mean, this gear hub housing, there's a lot of mass of steel there, and this little bit of a cooling fin for the amount of oil that's in here just coming up to the sight glass, I don't think it really adds that much value. I did want a nicer cover though, so I was able to maintain the factory plug, which used to be down here, and the bottom of the hole that used to be in the cover is now the center of the sight glass. So it used to be you take the plug out, you put the gear oil till it started running out, and you were done. So now the center of the sight glass represents the fill line of where the bottom of the hole used to be when this plug was down here. So we'll get those put on later. But first thing we're going to do, I guess we start putting this together, and there's a couple tricks here that really help out, make this thing go a lot easier, and these are actually really easy to put together. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the drive gear in, and this one has to go in first, and I'll show you why in a second. But so the first thing you want to do is set your gear hub housing. Set it on your bearing. We're not putting the oil seal in just yet. This is the brand new inner bearing. We're going to put that on there, and we're just using all this to hold it in place for now. We don't need to put the gear in or the spacers or any of that stuff. We just want to hold it to keep it from going anywhere. So we'll run that down. You don't need a lot of pressure on it. You just want to hold that in place, because the first thing we're going to do is put this gear in. So this gear should drop in. I did not replace the lower bearing race. I did one of these one time where I pulled that bottom race out of there, and you end up destroying your puller. You end up doing more damage to the gearbox than you really need, and they are a lot of work to get that bearing race out of there. And if they look good, they're smooth, they're not grooved up or overheated, I would say just leave them in. So the upper bearing race is a lot easier to replace because it just comes right out. So the first thing you want to do is importantly, do not forget this washer. This is the retaining washer that when your half shaft spline comes in here, this bolts to the end of your spline and keeps it drawn up tight to this gear. If you put your assembly together and realize, oh crap, I forgot to put this in, guess what? Your whole gearbox has to come apart and you're going to do it over. So this just drops into one end. This end is real shallow here. This end has a big taper, which is a guide for your spline when you're installing your half shaft after this is in. So you want to make sure this goes into the right end. It really goes in one way. And it'll probably fall out when you put this in, but you can also just lay it in the bottom and put your finger up through the access hole and just make sure that goes in there. You definitely want to make sure that's seated correctly. And after you do that, you can just put this bearing race in. This bearing race should just drop right in. Okay, now you have to shim up the inspection cover with the right amount of shims to get the right amount of backlash. So I've got a stack of these shims here. I've got 10 of them here. They used to make 50s, they used to make 10s, but it seems like the only ones they make now are the 5,000 thick ones. So they say an average of 6 to 10 shims to get your proper bearing spacing, and we'll start on that in a minute. But what I want to say is kind of important here is this retainer plate right here. Let me get a little closer here. This retainer plate should drop in freely. If it doesn't drop in freely, there's only about 1,000 of play in there to position it. But if you can't take that in and out by hand, if you need a hammer to tap that in and then have to pry it back out, then something's wrong. You need this thing to be completely free floating to get an accurate read on your shims going in and getting a reading off the top of that gear to get your end play. Your end play is supposed to be between 1,000s and 6,000s of movement for that gear to go up and down. So we're just going to start with 10 shims. If we go over, it's okay. If you got a real sloppy reading, it's easier to subtract from what you know than it is to add to what you don't know. Because if you start off with 1 or 2 shims, you bolt it down, that gear won't turn. It's bound up in there. You add another shim, you put it back together, it's still bound up in there. You might end up taking this, cap off 4 or 5 times before you realize, before you get it right. So start big and just subtract. It's a lot easier that way, and you may only have to do it once or even twice. So you drop that in there, and you're going to run a couple bolts in it. I found out that you can get away with just using 2 bolts. You don't have to do all 4. But you do want to snug them up. So you run those in. We use new hardware here. And they say to get all the old Loctite out of the holes when you disassemble these. Just run a tap through them. Run a tap through all the holes, the pipe threads, any tap that you can find that has Loctite in it. Just run a tap through those threads, clean them out real well, and then it makes it a lot easier to go together. So we're going to snug this up. Just run it down, and it stops hard. I mean, it's a nice solid feel when you tighten that up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put an indicator on here, and we're going to measure the amount of play, if there's any, by putting this indicator. This is a travel indicator, not to be confused with a dial indicator, which is not an accurate read. So we're going to go over here, and we're going to drop the, we can see, should be able to see it. So anyway, I'm going to get a screwdriver. So I should be able to get a screwdriver up underneath this gear on the inside and move it up and down, and you can see how much movement I got in that gear, and I can set this to 0 to get a reference point. And this is just a cheap magnetic dial indicator holder. It's a pretty cheap dial indicator. They're not that expensive, but it's a valuable tool, and it's important to get this right. So it looks like I have just under, right at about 5 thousandths play. So I'm going to say 10 was the magic number. It's funny because all the other gear hubs I put together, 10 was the magic number of shims, and those shims are 5 thousandths each. So I'm actually really good with that. And you want your gear to be dry, and you want your bearings to be dry when you're doing this. If you're completely packed with oil, you're going to get like a cushioning effect when you move this thing up and down. You want it to be dry so it's free to go up and fall back into position. And you can play with this as much as you want and make sure you've got a good read. But yeah, it's still moving about 5. So I'm good with that. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to take it apart again. And we're going to add the Loctite, and then we're going to torque these, and it's going to be done. So another interesting thing here is when you put this oil seal in for your input seal, the seal on this is slightly recessed. You can see it's down about 80 thousandths, and if you look at the Kentmore installation tool, there's a little step on there that's about 80 thousandths, and when you put that seal in there, that step actually recesses that seal down into that cover. So it's got to be in there just a little bit. If you make this seal flush, then your the housing on your half shaft is going to rub on it, and it's going to tear it up in a short amount of time. So so now we're just going to bolt this down, put Loctite on it. Don't forget to put the tab on for your vent line, and then we'll go on to the next part. Okay, so now we're going to put a little bit of Loctite on these bolts here. Put them down in there. You don't need a lot of this stuff. Just a little drop on the first couple of turns. And this last one gets the little bracket for the little rubber P-clamp that holds the breather line or the vent line off the gear hub. So you don't want to forget to put that part on. And now we are going to torque these to 25 to 35 foot-pounds. I tend to overkill things, so I'm just going to go to 35. And 35. When you get a solid beep on these are actually kind of nice. You don't have to do a lot of thinking about it. We'll come up on it slow. We're not there yet. We're just getting close. Now this bracket's going to want to turn when you tighten this. So what I usually do is just put a wrench on there, kind of hold that in place, keep it where you want it. And that solid beep means you are torqued. Okay, we're good with that. And now you should have a gear that still spins super nice. And just for fun, we're going to put this back on here one more time. And we're going to make sure we're still where we need to be. Turn it around this way. Get my screwdriver. set that to 0. These things tend to move all over the place. It's hard to get that on there with the seal in place to get it to sit on top of that gear. I actually may have shrunk a couple thousandths, but I do have play, and it turns real easy, and I am completely satisfied with that. This is probably one of the two most important aspects of putting this gear hub together. The other one is this right here. This nut right here is the only thing that keeps your wheel from leaving the vehicle. It's a little scary. It's kind of a messed up design to do it that way, but you know, it's if you do it right though, and you follow the procedure, you should never have a problem with it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pull this back off, and we're going to install the seal, and then we'll end up putting the gear back in. Now this truck's got 75,000 miles on it. This 12K gear is brand new. The bearings are new. This bearing's new. This gear is used, but when these come out, there's a little paint mark on the on one side over here, usually like right where they put the stamp for the gear number. Now I figure this gear is symmetrical. It's the same on both sides. There's no difference. And 75,000 miles of being driven on one side of the gear only, unless you're backing up, which counts for like maybe a mile. But what I'm going to do when I put this back together is I'm going to flip this gear over in this direction, because I figured I got brand new teeth, and I'll start meshing on the other side of that gear that has literally no wear on it, which kind of makes sense to me that, you know, why not flip it over and have new tooth against a new tooth instead of a new tooth against a worn tooth. So we're going to turn it around when we put it back in there. I did my fronts that way, had no problem, and it's super smooth. So now I'm going to get this thing off and lay it over on the side, and we're going to put that seal in and then keep going. Okay, now we're going to put this this output seal in, and I've got the Kentmore installation tool here, and you notice this one doesn't have a step on it. So this seal was designed to go flush. If you're using there's an alternative two-piece seal where the first piece has to go in and it has to get buried way down in there, and then the other half of it actually goes onto the spindle. But the one-piece seals are a lot easier, and you just put them in, you get them flush, you use this tool, it'll set it correctly, and you're good to go. Now this tool came with this ginormous steel handle, which you can use to drive this thing down in there, and I don't really like it. It tries to hit too much at one time. This is a big seal, and there's a lot of surface area right here, so I'm going to take just a little tiny bit of gear oil here, and I'm just going to coat the outside of this thing just a little bit to help it slide in. Don't need much, just enough to put a nice thin film on there, and then we'll tap this thing in there. This makes that seal go in a whole lot easier. You want to go evenly as possible. And you can hear it when it bottoms out. That looks pretty good there. We're still a little bit high on this side. And that looks pretty good. Still a little higher actually. So we're just going to tap that a little bit more and try to get that to go down. And that is way better. Alright, we'll go ahead and flip this over, and then we'll get it set up to put the gears in, and then put the hub onto the spindle for the last time. Okay, now we're ready to put the gear hub onto the spindle. So we need the there's a spacer that looks like this. It's got a small end and then it's got a bigger end. The smaller end goes on the bearing race here, and then the bigger end lands against the along the drive gear. So you don't want to put it in like this, because this part here is so big. If you get it backwards, you could start running on that race, and then you don't have a lot of surface area pushing on that gear. So you want to put it in like that with the smaller end down. So you put that down on there, and then now you're going to put this gear in. Like I said, when it came out, it was ink side down, so we're going to flip it over this way, and now we're going to slide it in through this hole, and you basically line it up. That's almost self-centering. We're going to flip this on its side, and we're going to put a little bit of oil, gear oil, on that seal. That's going to keep it from dragging. And then we're going to put a little bit of oil on that spindle for the same reason. And then all we got to do is set that down there, on there, and then this is kind of self-centering. Just kind of guide that gear on there, and that's it. You're down on there. And yeah, that looks really good. So after this, you have a cone-shaped spacer. Looks like this. It's going to be, again, it's going to be the large side against the gear. And then I don't see where it went. Ah, there it is. So now you got that brand new bearing. That's going to drop right in there, like so. And then you got your keyed washer. I'm not sure which way that goes. It probably doesn't matter. It doesn't turn. So I'm going to put it in like that. And now they say to put a little bit of grease on the back side of that nut. And this is the second part that's really critical. I'm going to see if I can home in here a little bit. So you've got this lock nut here, and you've got a cap screw in here. And what you're going to do is you're going to run this down, and there's a procedure, a little process you have to go through. And once you start, the manual says you have, once the Loctite hits the screw, you have 10 minutes to complete this action, or you defeat the purpose of the Loctite. It'll dry out on you, and it won't hold. And you definitely want this thing to do its job, especially when earlier I said this nut is the only thing that keeps your wheel from departing from your vehicle. So we're going to put a little grease on this. Actually, put it on the back side of here, and we're going to get this set up and ready to go, and we'll get that process done. Okay, I think we're about ready to get this spindle nut tightened up properly, and we're going to show you how to do that. So since you only have 10 minutes working time, I want to make sure I got everything ready to go. I got one torque wrench set at 90 foot-pounds. I got one torque wrench for the little screws set at 90 inch-pounds. And this one, to start off, is set at 40 foot-pounds to do the initial tightening of the nut. And then you back it off and you go to 25. So one thing I learned by putting these together is everything in here is dry and clean. So I know you put a little bit of oil on the seal, but not too much else. When you torque this down to 40 foot-pounds for the initial preload, this thing turns really hard. I mean, you could feel those rollers going around. It is not smooth at all. And I thought, the first couple times I did this, like, what is wrong here? Like, 40 foot-pounds is way too much on this nut to preload these bearings. I thought it was binding something awful. Well, come to find out that if you get all this stuff wet, you're not going to fill the gearbox up, obviously, but if you get this stuff wet, it turns 10 times better and makes the process a whole lot smoother. So I'm going to take a little bit of the 80-90 gear oil, and I'm just going to put a little bit in here, and we're going to start getting these bearings a little bit pre-lubricated. And then this one down here in the bottom is a little tricky, so what I usually do is just try to tip this thing up at an angle and just get some down on that bottom seal and that bottom gear. Get it to run in there. This one too. Get that one in there. And then the top one, actually the top one's going to be really hard to get to, but you can get a little bit of oil going in there, just like that. And then work that around a little bit. And get all those bearings wet and lubricated. And it's going to make it so much nicer. So we're about ready now. We're going to put the Loctite on the screw. And then we're going to start this process. So the manual says to run the screw in and tighten it until all the wobble is out of this nut. You don't want any, if it's spread out too far, if you got a big gap in here, then you want to use this to draw that up and try to close this nut around that spindle thread to give you a more accurate reading. Now it also tells you when you're clearing out the Loctite, chase that thread with a 1032 tap and then try to get as much Loctite off of the screw as possible, or you can even replace the screw if you want to go that route. So there's our Loctite. We're going to put it in, and our 10-minute countdown will start. And this is actually really easy. So we're going to tighten this up and put a little bit of tension on it to where we can still just barely turn it. That's too tight, and that's pretty good right there. I can turn that pretty free. So now what we're going to do is we're going to torque this to 40 foot-pounds, and this is a modified, this is a socket modified from the old style, and I put 3 pins in it to lock into those 3 little pins, those notches there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to 40 foot-pounds. There's 40 foot-pounds. And now they say you're going to go 5 turns in this direction. And this is to seat any bearing races or bearings that you might have replaced. And since we put a new bearing in here, I didn't replace any of the other races. So they say to go 5 in each direction. And that will allow that to seat. And now with that oil on there, you can see this is super smooth. I mean, if all those bearings and that seal were dry, yeah, it wouldn't be spinning like this, trust me. So so there's our 40 pounds, and then the bearings are seated and the races are seated. So now we're going to back this off, and it's going to go on just like that. And we're going to back it off, and we're going to reset our torque wrench for 25 foot-pounds. And that is the final preload. This thing's touchy. There's 25 foot-pounds. I can't see which way that goes. Okay, there's 25 foot-pounds. Now what we're going to do is we're going to torque this screw to 90 inch-pounds, right where it sits. And make sure this does not move. Put a mark on this. Make sure it does not move while you are tightening this up. Okay, there's 90 inch-pounds. Now what you want to do, you want to take your big torque wrench. It's already set, this one's set to 90 foot-pounds, and you're going to try to back this nut off until you achieve that 90 foot-pounds, until it clicks. You hold on to this thing here. 90 pounds is a lot of pull. Oh, and it did not click, and it moved. That's not a good sign. So the theory is it's supposed to click at 90 foot-pounds. Maybe I got a torque wrench problem. We're going to do this again. That was not supposed to move. Book says if it moves, then replace your half nut or replace your nut and the screw. That means that thing is no good. So if we can't get this to work, we're going to have to do a little pause here. And we need to go right there. Okay, we're going to loosen this up again. We're going to tighten it back up to 25 foot-pounds. Okay, we're going to retorque this. To 90 inch-pounds. And we're going to use this torque wrench, and we're going to go to 90 foot-pounds. And we're going to try to back it off. Seemed like I was pulling kind of hard on that the last time. Okay, I pulled on that pretty good. Something going on with my torque wrench. Maybe I didn't have it set up right. Anyway, if you go back it off 90 foot-pounds and then you look at that mark you put on there and that nut did not move, then you are good to go. So that is super smooth. And now would be a good time to put in your plug on the bottom, maybe your vent fitting here, and then we'll flip this over on its side and we'll put that new side cover on there and get that ready to go. Okay, I'm getting ready to put the drain plug in here. I'm using just some Loctite 5113 thread sealant with Teflon. I like this better than the tape. For steel threads, it seems to work really well getting in there. So just a little ring around the outside. Doesn't have to be a lot. Now, I opted to go with a stainless steel plug with a magnet on it. When I took two of these gear hubs apart, I had to drill out. I don't know, I've only had this thing a couple years, and I don't know who wrenched on it before. I don't know if the plugs have ever come out, but they were steel on steel after 20 years. It was not letting go. So I figured dissimilar metals, the stainless won't corrode against the stainless or the steel casting on this gear hub, and I think this is just going to be a much easier way to go. And these don't need to be that tight anyway. That's all you really need on that. I tried taking the steel ones out, and it rounded out the inside of the hole first. I couldn't get it to turn. I tried vice grips on it. I got one out with vice grips by grabbing the outside. Second one, I tried a pipe wrench on it. I couldn't get it to come out that way. Ended up having to drill a hole through the center and just keep drilling the hole out until I could punch an easy out up in there. Finally got it to release. So hopefully with the stainless ones and possibly regular maintenance this time, this stainless steel one won't be an issue. Okay, I got the stainless drain plug installed. I've got this is a zinc-plated steel vent line fitting. I've got it got that one put in, sealed up. I like this better than the brass ones for some reason. But now what we're going to do is we're going to flip this thing on its side, and we're going to get this flat so we can put this cover on and put the sealant on and get it tightened and torqued down. So I'm going to reconfigure this thing a little bit, and then we'll get the inspection cover installed. Okay, I think we're ready to install the inspection cover here. So for this, I'm going to be using the Loctite 5118. It's an anaerobic sealant, and also the Loctite Clean and Prime. This is you spray it on both sides, you let it dry. It's a cleaner primer, and it helps activate this gasket maker here. Now the difference between like silicone or Permatex or something like that, Permatex cures in the presence of air, and anaerobic sealant cures in the absence of air. So as soon as you get this in there and squish it and there's no more air in there, the stuff sets up pretty fast. So squeezing it out of this tube is kind of a pain because the tube's mushy all over the place and you don't get any control and you end up putting a lot more on than you want to. So what I do is I go out and I buy these cheap little, these cheap plastic throwaway syringes. They come with a real fine curved plastic tip. I just cut it off to where I think I need the size of the bead. This gives you a lot more control going around all your screw holes and everything. And this is just bulky and it makes a mess and you end up getting the stuff everywhere. Where this you get a lot more control out of it. So we're gonna start over here and we're gonna run a bead of this around. You don't need much. And we're going to go around each one of the screw holes a little bit. You really don't need to. I do it anyway. These are just casting holes from when they machine this thing. They're just little blind holes. They go nowhere. So make sure you want to put this on right way. It only goes on one way. The top hole here is offset a little bit so you can't get this backwards. And now when you put this on, they say don't slide it around all over the place because you'll squeeze your stuff out. So what I usually do is just take a couple of these little stainless set screws and just put them in a couple of turns. And that's going to help locate your cover to where it doesn't move all over the place. It's going to hold it there. And then you're going to put Loctite on all your screws and you're going to get them started. And the book says 8 to 13 foot-pounds on these, but since I'm going with a much thicker cover, I think I'm going to go like 20 foot-pounds of torque on these. And I don't think it will ever come off or ever go anywhere. And I know this is a long, boring, tedious process. And I forgot to get a hex key. I think I can get them out. So once you got some screws started, you can take these back out. Put a little Loctite on your last couple screws here. Get it started. And these aren't stainless, these are alloy plated steel. For the most part, stainless steel hardware is junk. It is so soft and people are like, oh, let's put stainless hardware on everything. This stuff is so gummy soft that it's not a good strong fastener. They look good, but for strength they basically suck. So I'm going to run all these down. Get this rod out of the way. I do like this fixture. It worked out really well. For taking the gear hub out, and it actually works really well for putting the gear hub back in. It does a great job of holding up the gear hub, so I don't have to. So now I'm going to torque these things to 20 foot-pounds. I think I already got it set on 20. And we're just going to alternate around. You can see that sealant's already coming all the way to the outside, all the way under there, and I didn't put that much on. So one more for good measure. Alright, so that's done. So now we're going to stand this thing back up. And I just got a wooden board here holding that up. It's probably going to fall off. Loosen that rod back up. And that is actually about it. It's about time to put this back on the truck. But you're probably saying, hold on a second, you didn't put your steering arm on. Well, okay, here's something cool. Let me move the camera around here. I found out that when you're taking these gear hubs off, it is a lot easier to remove this from the gear hub first. Just take the 4 bolts out and knock it out of the way. And then when you're putting the gear hub back in, wait till it's installed and then put this on. The reason being, I don't know about the factory ball joints, but I have the aftermarket Moog ones that I bought from HPG, and they're a little bit bigger diameter on the housings and the casings. And what I come to find out is when you're trying to drop the gear hub, this hits on the bottom, on the top of the ball joint housing, and it makes it really difficult to get this thing out of here because it crashes on here and it won't let the gear hub come down and drop off of that lower ball joint. So this gets all kinds of obstructions out of your way. You just need to be careful if you're going to do it this way. This is where your CTIS seal rides, so you want to make sure that this is not going to get damaged, dinged up, scratched, or anything like that, because then if you're going to use your CTIS, you definitely don't want that to leak. So I found out by waiting until after it's done, put this in last, and it makes it a whole lot easier to get this thing in and out. So we're about ready to put this on the truck. There's one more thing I'm going to do. I'm going to sit up here for real quick, and I'll be back. Okay, we're almost ready to install this thing. Now, when I painted this gear hub, I hung it on a giant hook, this little makeshift paint rack that I made, and I got a little bit of the paint down inside the hole, the taper hole here, where the ball joint's going to go. So, last thing I do is I take these little hex-mounted wire brushes, and they come in all different diameters, and I cover this up so you don't get grit stuff down inside, what you just did. But you want to just clean out the inside of those tapers a little bit. And you want to make sure there's no paint or no imperfections or anything in those holes. That's going to allow your ball joints to have a nice, consistent, and firm grab on when you bolt this thing back in. If you get a little nick or some contamination in there, if you leave paint in there, it may not really hurt anything, but it won't be good. But just clean it out. Take your time. I always say just take your time and do it right. And that feels really, really nice. So the next step, we're going to stand this up and get it ready, and we're going to put it on the truck. Okay, we've got this gear hub mounted up to this fixture here. We're about ready to install it. I think I've got all the parts I need over here to finish bolting that thing in. And this cart, I bought it at Harbor Freight. It makes it really nice. It's got hydraulics, goes up and down, and you can adjust the angle on that plate right there to get this gear hub to go in. And it's a lot easier because you don't have to hold it up. But another little trick I want to show you real quick. So in your ball joints, you've got the hole where your cotter pin goes. So it's a lot easier. You can take a screwdriver, and if you orientate that hole before you put this in, just take a screwdriver and rotate that hole so it's side to side instead of front to back. And then when you go to put your cotter pin in, it won't be up against the back of your gear hub, and you're trying to get that thing bent out of the way, and then it gets jammed up back there and you don't have a lot of room. So if you align your cotter pin holes from side to side, the cotter pins go in a lot easier. And then over here I've got the radius rod, which I just recently replaced. I've got the back of it loose. I just made it loose so I could get it up out of the way while I'm putting the gear hub in, so the steering arm doesn't fall down. Now the bolt in the back, I'm going to leave those loose until the tires are back on and the thing's sitting on the ground. So I'm going to tighten this, the back part of the radius rod after all the weight and the compression is done. That way the bushing gets locked in where it should be, and it's not under a bind when I set it back down. A lot of, if you tighten those bolts up, like the lower control arm bolts and everything, if you tighten them up and torque them when the arms are completely down, when you set this down and they compress and they move, you're putting a lot of tension on that rubber bushing, and that's not its natural place to sit. So good idea to just tighten all those up after the fact when all the weight's back on the truck. And that's about it for that. So now we're gonna roll this thing up, and I don't know if I can film this and put it on at the same time. We'll see. But this thing just kind of goes in. We can run it up and see if we can get this thing to bolt up. This may not film very well. It takes a few minutes to get this thing on here, but it's actually really easy. So you can kind of just, let's see if I can lower this a little bit. Put this under here. Don't know that you're going to be able to see much, but this makes it a whole lot nicer. Now I can just kind of run this thing up, and you can kind of see maybe how close that that nut gets to the upper part of the ball joint housing. If that steering arm cover was on there, that would be really difficult at this point, because it just doesn't want to go around and drop into that spot. So that's almost it for the bottom. And if you take a pry bar and you could stick it up under here, this one moves pretty easily, so you can move that out of the way. Well, let's just see. Hard to do this with two hands, but we're just about in. You can adjust these there we go. Let that relax a little bit. Bring that ball joint back. There we go. Make sure you don't get any metal in there. You'll get to a point where it'll drop right in. So the bottom is enough to get started. And then just use that pry bar. Bring that control arm down a little bit. Get that nut started. Now, you probably take those nuts off the back of the spindle. And depending on where the height is, that just comes right off. And there you go. Your gear hub is installed. Now I can just go ahead and run those nuts up and torque them, put the cotter pins in, and put the radius rod in last. This will allow you to rotate this thing to the side and get that steering arm cover on and get it torqued down. And we'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, we've got the cotter pins in. We've got the nuts torqued. This one I believe is 68. The bottom one's about 73, and that is actually just a minimum recommended torque. Sometimes you have to go past to get the holes to line up for the cotter pin. You never want to loosen the nut to line the holes up. You always want to go tighter. And general rule, you're never going to get the torque to come in and the hole to line up at the same time. So you always end up going a little bit past. Okay, so now we're going to put this this other steering arm cover on. I've already got it primed. I've got it cleaned. I've got everything done on the back side. I got the sealant put on, and you want to make sure you take a little bit of oil and put a little gear oil on that inner seal. And when you're changing that CTIS seal, don't forget to put the snap ring back in. I don't think 50 pounds of tire pressure is enough to push that seal out, but you kind of want to put that snap ring back in there. So this just it's really easy now. It just kind of fits over the back. You got plenty of room to work, and that's it. You're on there. So you want to get a couple of bolts started. The first one I'm just going to go in. I need another hand to put Loctite on, so we're going to put a little Loctite on this one. Start it on the bottom over here. And as I said earlier in the video, if you chase those threads out with a tap, these bolts go in so much nicer when those threads are clean. Otherwise, you're going to put a wrench on it. You're going to fight all that old Loctite. You don't really want to do that. So I'll take this upper one back out, put a little Loctite on it. It's nice being able to run the bolts all the way down to the bottom without a wrench. Okay, now on the front side, you get this little shield here, and this protects your CTIS line if you're going to put a CTS line in. So this one's a little bit different. You've got your two bolts that go into the cover. The front bolts are actually just a little bit longer than the back bolts. And then a lot of people, when they take their gearboxes off, they are so grungy. Stuff falls off when you're taking these apart. A lot of people don't realize it, but there's a couple of spacers that go underneath the shield here. And if you try to put this in, it doesn't sit flat because you got the recesses here for the bolts. So you can tighten them up, and then you'll end up distorting this real bad. So you want to make sure that you've got both those spacers in there, and they're pretty thick. If you can see that in camera, they're a lot thicker than the regular washer. And what they do is they just stand off and let this cover clear the steering arm. So we're going to do a little bit of Loctite on these. And if I'm sniffing a lot, folks, I'm sorry. This is springtime in Arizona, and Palo Verde trees and my sinuses do not get along. So you put all that back in, and these get torqued to 68 pounds. We're going to alternate around. Do this one down here. Come over here. I have to move the camera a little bit. And that's it. We are torqued. Give that a little bit of time to set up, and then we can put that gear oil inside. that's about it. So not much left to do. Put the radius rod on, put my breeder line on. Got to put the half shafts in. Got the 12K half shafts over here, and after that is just replaced my last two shocks with these new GT adjustable shocks, which I put the front ones on already, and they ride really nice. Takes a lot of the stiffness out of the truck. Alright, we'll come back in a minute when more of this stuff is buttoned up and try to finish this video up. I know it's getting long. Okay, we're about at the end of the video here, so everything's back together. The only thing I have left to do is reattach my parking brake cable up in there, and you know, if you ever fought that cable getting that little E-clip on, I gotta tell you, this is the tool to have right here. They're made by Rotor Clip, and they hold that clip wherever you want it, and you just shove the thing up in there, get it lined up with that slot, and give it a little push, and it is done. It takes like 2 seconds to put one of these in. It's hard to get up in there with a screwdriver and try to push it into that groove, but this works really well. So I already got these all full of oil. You can see I got the sight glass, and probably put a couple drops too much in there, but not a big deal. And the only thing I'm have left to do on this is put the new shocks in, and then I'm really excited about getting my new CTIS lines put in. I made these up out of some parts I found online. These are real similar to the OEM ones, except the difference is they come off all the way. The OEM ones just kind of unlock and move back a little bit. These are double sealing, so this will seal up when it's off, and this will seal up when it's off, unless you push that little button right there to release air. And I went ahead and added a second O-ring onto this sleeve right here, just kind of like the factory one for a little insurance. So as soon as I get my valve stem swapped out, I'm going to be excited to put these on and see how they work. Don't know if I'm going to do a video for this or not. It's pretty simple. But that's about it. So all in all, I've got about 10 hours in this whole job for both of them. Got the one over here finished up. So that one's all done, installed, ready to go, ready to put a wheel back on. So I think I'm just going to shoot a little bit of grease into everything first, and down the road I go. Hope you got some good information out of this. Thanks for watching, and we'll make some more videos in the future.